Welcome back to the deep dive. Okay, ever tried navigating a totally new city's transport system and just felt lost? Now picture that, but add, I don't know, a few million extra people heading to the Olympics. Bit stressful.
Huh. Yeah, that gives you maybe a tiny glimpse of the sheer logistical challenge Paris took on for the 2024 Games transport. Your sources really lay it all out, showing just how vital getting mobility right is. Like, we saw what happened in places like Atlanta or Rio when it, well, didn't quite go to plan.
Exactly. I'm Hari,
And I'm Kimi.
and today we're going to unpack this incredible amount of detail you sent us about Paris 2024. It covers, well, everything. The big picture plans, the new infrastructure bits, the day-to-day running of it all, accessibility issues, security, even some, unexpected disruptions.
It's quite the collection. Our goal here is really to sift through it and pull out the key insights for you.
So what jumps out first from all this material? The scale, I imagine.
Oh, absolutely, the scale. You're talking about needing to move maybe 500,000 spectators daily for the Olympics, 300,000 for the Paralympics, just within the Paris area. And that's before you add athletes, officials, media, everyone else. It demanded huge investment, over 500 million euros, specifically tagged for transport improvements for the Games.
Wow. €500 million just to
Yeah.
transport. That's
Yeah.
that's massive. What was the thinking there? Were they building brand new stuff or focusing on what they already had?
The sources suggest it was mostly about boosting the existing core system. A smart move, probably. They really pushed hard on key upgrades like extending Metro Line 14 that was critical and major work on the RER network, like RERE. It seems like a lesson learned from past games. Use the event to speed up long-term city transport plans, not just build temporary stuff. They even paused usual summer repair work to keep everything running.
Right, leveraging the event for lasting improvements.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Okay, so the infrastructure capacity was boosted, but how did they manage the actual flow of people day to day? You mentioned a human element.
Yes, that was key. They had, I think, 5,000 agents out there. You'd see them in purple vests, basically there to help guide people, especially visitors who wouldn't know the system. And alongside that, there was a pretty sophisticated mobile app for real-time navigation, rerouting you if there were issues. Plus, they ramped up service frequency. About 15% more trains and buses than a normal summer, though the sources do mention visitors paid higher fares for that period.
Hmm. Okay, so lots of planning for smooth running, but one area your sources really flagged as, well, a bit tricky, was accessibility, especially the old metro stations.
Yeah, that's where the history of a city like Paris really comes into play. The trams and most buses, accessible. But the metro, most stations were built, a century ago. It's a massive, deep-rooted challenge. For the Games, the solution was sort of temporary accessible taxis and special shuttles connecting venues to the few metro stations that were accessible. Longer term, though, the sources talk about a huge commitment to make the metro accessible, but frankly, they estimate it could take 2 decades and billions. It really shows the scale of that particular issue.
2 decades and billions.
Yeah.
Yeah, that puts it in perspective. It highlights the deep infrastructure problems they had to kind of work around. Beyond trains and buses, the sources mentioned other things too, like roads and rivers.
Definitely. They set up dedicated road lanes, 185 kilometers of them, just for official Games vehicles. And with the Seine being so central, they had specific controls for river traffic near venues, too.
And I noticed the cycling part. Paris has been pushing bikes lately, hasn't it? Did the Games feed into that?
They really did. Cycling was actively promoted. They added, I think it was 415 kilometers of cycle paths, including Special Olympics routes connecting venues, plus something like 27,000 temporary bike racks, a clear effort to push sustainable options beyond just public transport.
Makes sense. Sustainable, efficient, but security must have been an enormous headache across such a huge network. How did they manage that?
It was a massive centralized operation. Everything coordinated from one command center hooked up to over 100,000 cameras across the network. Security presence was way up, more police, extra security guards, even specialized dog units. And unfortunately, that vigilance was needed. The sources mentioned some arson attacks actually hit high-speed rail lines right on the day of the opening ceremony. Shows the kind of unpredictable things they had to be ready for.
Wow, arson attacks on opening day. That really underscores the vulnerability even with intense planning. Okay, so pulling back, how did it all actually work out in the end? Did the plan deliver?
Mostly, yes. The sources paint a picture of, well, significant success in key areas. Paris actually hit its ambitious carbon reduction target, a 54.6% cut compared to London and Rio's average. That's huge, and directly down to the transport choices.
Over 50% carbon reduction. That's genuinely impressive for an event this size. And did people actually use the public transport and bikes?
They really did. An incredibly high number, 87% of spectators used public transport. Another 5% cycled. It suggests the infrastructure, the extra services, the guidance, it all worked to steer people towards those options. The sources say spectator travel forecasts were spot on, and despite moving millions, no major system failures were reported. A resounding success overall.
So it sounds like despite the inherent challenges like accessibility in the old metro and those unexpected disruptions, the core plan held up.
That seems to be the main takeaway, yes. Meticulous planning, significant investment focused on leveraging the existing network. It delivered a successful outcome while still acknowledging those big long-term challenges that Paris still faces.
Right. Well, that wraps up our deep dive into the massive transport operation for Paris 2024. It's been quite something unpacking all the layers involved. Thanks for joining us on this.
Always fascinating to explore these complex logistical puzzles.
So as you think about this huge effort, maybe consider this. How much can these giant global events really push forward long-term city improvements and policy shifts versus just being incredibly complex but ultimately temporary logistical exercises, something to mull over?